Hello everyone, it's Silver. This is Thyria. So this is kind of a bizarre game, but the best way I can put it is that it's sort of a combination of like the combat and team building of something like Darkest Dungeon with the kind of overworld exploration-y bits of the Heroes of Might and Magic games a little bit. The overall gameplay loop is actually pretty simple, but it's all of the management in between and the building of your team and the making sure everyone is nice and strong and all that stuff where a lot of the complexity comes in. So you play as Thyria, a witch, and your job is to delve into the dreams of nearby village folk and help defeat their inner demons, which as it turns out are actual demons. Every dream is a sort of procedural environment that you'll explore around in, find various pieces of loot and other things in that you eventually want to bring back, and of course fight off lots of ghosts and demons and things, and then eventually complete whatever the main objective is for that person to sort of cure them. However, if you fail a dream, then they actually die, so you want to be as cautious as you can while exploring to sort of understand how long you're staying in the dream and how your resources are looking and when you need to bail out. And the main conceit is actually a crafting system where you'll be doing a lot of the game's stuff in general between dreams. And the crafting system, it looks simple at first because it's just a two-item system where you combine just two items together, but there are lots of different things to combine and various different kinds of progression items and stuff that you can get from this. Although the main one that you're going to be wanting at first are soul jewels, which you will combine to create guardians, because you need guardians to take with you into a dream to actually fight. You will use some of this dust that you can get from exploring to create these jewels, and then combine two jewels, and that will create a guardian. You need one day and one night jewel, and each jewel has a sort of specific list of things that it represents. Like one of them may represent all physical attacks and things, and the other may represent time manipulation. So you want to combine whatever two that are night and day that you think sound good, and most of the time you will get a guardian out of it. Some are not actually valid combinations and won't do anything, but you also won't waste any of the materials involved either. It'll just prevent you from doing any sort of recipe that's not valid, and once you do find a valid recipe, it'll actually note it down in a recipe book so that you can do it more quickly next time if you need to. You can take up to 3 guardians with you into a dream, although you may want more than that on a team for a similar reason that you may want more than 4 people on a Darkest Dungeon team, because sometimes they can be out of commission or something like that and you might need to take someone else. This is mostly because of the cursed system. If you ever fail a dream, then every one of the guardians you brought with you will be cursed, like in one curse of some kind. They're all really bad, although some of them are worse than others. Some of them may just do something like lower a lot of their stats to make them less effective in combat, while another one might make it to where the next time they die, they're gone for good and you can't get them back. But if you ever succeed in a dream, then it will cure one curse on each of the guardians you brought with you. So there is a reason to bring cursed guardians with you. That's how you actually cure them. Each guardian has a list of active skill slots, and each of the 2 gems that make them up have 5 different active skills that they represent, and you can mix and match whichever ones you currently have unlocked. And usually each skill is actually 2 skills, because there's a day and night cycle in the dreams, and these skills change between whether it's day or night for 2 different forms of each skill, except for the final skill, the sort of most powerful one of each of the gems. This one only has 1 form, and if it's not the right time of day, then you just can't use it at all. There's also a really interesting sort of combination system where you can take the day form of one skill and the night form of another skill and combine them together to create a skill that has only those 2 and not the other forms that those skills normally take. So you can create sort of a hybrid skill between 2 others, which is a really neat idea actually. Once you're plopped down into a dream, you'll be on a sort of exploration overworld where you can walk around and find various things. And you'll have a threat meter at the top of the screen that slowly fills up as you walk. Once this fills up, you'll be attacked by demons, and that's when the turn-based combat system starts involving your guardians. It's on a grid, and you can move your guardians through the grid and also attack on your turns, and each attack has its own range and stuff, so you gotta move within range of the enemies and try and beat them all down before they get you. But, interestingly, there's also a real-time combat system that has nothing to do with your guardians, and is instead fought by your character as a witch. Sometimes when you're walking around the dreams, you'll find these sort of blobs around the place, and if you get too close to them, then they'll spawn waves of ghosts all around you, and you have to fight the ghosts with your cube, which is the sort of artifact that lets you do all of this dream wandering in the first place. It has some basic attacks that it does on its own, and you can slot in these things called circuits, which will improve its attacks or add new ones for this particular combat system, and you will also have some active spells that you can cast, like a fireball and stuff, in order to defeat these ghosts. And these are kind of odd. I'm in two minds about them because they do add something else to do while you're exploring, and they have their own rewards and stuff, so they do feel like a fair addition to the game formula, but at the same time they feel kind of weird. And considering it has a pretty detailed and complex turn-based combat system, this kind of feels extra, like something added on top that doesn't necessarily need to be there. It's fine, and I understand why it's there, but it does feel a little bit tacked on in comparison to the other combat system the game already has. While you're exploring, you'll also find some other things, like some towns that are taken over by a large group of enemies that you can fight. Sometimes there'll be multiple waves of enemies, and once you get into the circle of influence, you can actually choose whether to fight the combat in turn-based combat form with your guardians, or to make it spawn waves of ghosts instead, so you can choose which form of combat you want to take. You can also find various resources around the place that you can gather up and take with you, but you only get to keep all this if you succeed at the dream. So all this stuff that you're picking up, you got to be a bit careful with. You do have a weight limit, and you got to fit everything within that weight limit. And there are also some items that have other effects when you pick them up, like one of them that might damage all of your guardians, or one of them that might reserve a bunch of your ether, which is the resource you use for casting spells outside and inside of combat, so it just makes combat a bit more difficult. But of course, a lot of these items that have negative effects are also really powerful or useful or valuable in some way, so you do want them generally. It's just kind of up to you to decide whether your run is in a good enough state to be able to pick that kind of stuff up yet, or if you need to just find the objective and get out. There are various different kinds of objectives that you may find, like one of them might be a portal, an escape portal that you've got to get to that'll have some enemies guarding it once you get there. And there are also things like boss levels. There are several different bosses to fight, and they get increasingly more difficult as you go. They unlock more of the story. There is actually a story to follow, and there are also different unlocks that defeating these bosses will get you in terms of upgrading mechanics or adding new mechanics and stuff. Like, for instance, all of your guardians have 3 skill slots that they can equip all of their skills into, but eventually you can unlock up to 5 once you beat a certain number of bosses. But once you complete the objective and you complete the dream, you will gain some experience for your character, as well as some other resources and some other stuff depending on what you picked up while you were exploring, and take it all back home. And this is where you sort of restart the cycle, right? You craft some new stuff, you upgrade your guardians, you maybe look at some new gear, and you go on a new dream. And this is where all of the progression stuff comes in, because there are several different modes of progression in this game, several ways to make yourself stronger all at once. To start off with, your character themselves has an experience gauge, and whenever this fills, you'll be able to put 1 point into some of her stats. And her stats are a bit unusual since they're not geared towards combat exactly, they're geared more towards like exploration. So you have stats like the more obvious ones, like more health, because you have these blue hearts that represent the sort of mental health of the patient that you're actually treating. And you've also got some less obvious ones, like more weight, so that you can carry some more stuff home with you, and some others like the divination stat, which actually makes that threat gauge at the top of the screen fill more slowly. You can also find and craft equipment. Sometimes you'll find pieces of equipment, especially from boss levels and things, but you can also, you tend to be able to make it by combining one of those soul jewels that you use to make a guardian, and then something else, another material that's not another jewel. And by doing this, you can usually create some equipment that you can equip Thyria with. And she has several different equipment slots, like a head slot, a weapon slot, a boot slot, stuff like that, in order to just equip all the various things that you can find and make. And all of the equipment has kind of like Diablo-style ARPG loot passives on it. So there's all sorts of different things that you can find that will improve your guardians or improve yourself, and equipping a good selection of those will make you stronger. You also have the witchcraft level. Basically, every 5 times you craft something, you will gain a witchcraft level, and each one has a different thing that it gives you. Some of them give you high rarity equipment, some of them give you a whole bunch of dust to use or other resources, some of them are actually permanent stat increases that are usually pretty large. So there's a lot of good reasons to increase this whenever you can and do lots of crafting. Another bit of progression that is one of the more common things you can craft are charms, and charms are equipment for your guardians. And every guardian has a couple of charm slots, and this again can be expanded when it comes to meeting certain thresholds in the story. And charms are a lot like equipment for you in that they have sort of ARPG style stats attached to them, so they can be all kinds of different things, except in the charms case, they are stats that specifically deal with that guardian that it's equipped on. You'll also be getting cube knowledge just by defeating ghosts and demons and completing dreams and stuff. And this is basically like an experience system for your guardians. You can look at your guardian screen whenever you want when you're at home, and you can spend this knowledge to level up one of the 2 gems that the Guardian is composed of. Each gem has its own separate level, and these levels are added up to determine a level for the Guardian themselves, a sort of final level that represents their overall strength. And for the first 5 level ups of each of the gems, you will unlock their active skills, so that's how you get more skills to socket into your skill bar for each character. But also, each time you level up these gems, you will gain a stat point that you can put into the stats of the gem itself, which will improve several different stats of the Guardian. So you've got glow, symmetry, hardness, purity, and luster, and these represent several different stats each. And if you hover over them, you actually get a letter grade that shows you what each of the stats scale to. So like glow scales AA for power, meaning it increases the power a lot per point of glow, and things like that. It allows you to see what each of these actually means. Whenever you create a new Guardian, their overall level will scale to the level of your witch, and this allows you to not fall too far behind if you need to make new ones. They will start at a more appropriate level for where you are. You can also sometimes get more of these stat points to spend for other things other than just leveling up the jewels. Sometimes you can complete side quests and stuff that will give you new stat points across the board that will apply to all Guardians, which is super nice. And then, of course, you have the cube itself, which I mentioned has circuits that you can socket into it that will improve its effects during the ghost defense segments of the game. So you've got several different modes of progression here. You've got improving Thyria, improving your Guardians, crafting more stuff, improving your cube, and then eventually going on to dreams once you've got all that sorted out. So this does mean that in between missions, you have quite a lot to do. You've got a lot of different menus to actually tackle, but I think they are presented pretty well. The menus are not laid out in like a confusing way. It makes going to each of these pretty painless, and the fact that you've got to do this so often is probably a good reason for them to put a lot of effort into the design of these screens and stuff to make sure that they're as painless as possible. So they've done a good job with that. At least it doesn't feel like a slog to do all of these improvements and stuff. It's all very responsive and obvious, and you don't get lost in a bunch of menus. You've also got some choices when it comes to choosing a new dream, because when you go to the dream screen, you don't just have one. You will usually have one that is the next story beat, but then you've got several others that are optional that you can choose to tackle instead. And they will have a level that shows the overall level of the enemies in that area so that you can compare it to your Guardians and stuff and know if you think you can take that on or not. They'll also have a couple of extra modifiers that will make the area more difficult. Like it'll say, you know, a certain kind of enemy spawns more often, or the threat gauge fills this % faster, or something like that. And as you go through the game, you'll have characters with more and more of these modifiers, making the areas more and more difficult. Also, before you choose one, you can choose to inject them with a sort of treatment, which is interesting, and it will amplify the rewards that you get, but it will also amplify all of those difficulty factors and make them worse. So you can choose to inject multiple times, and each time you do it, you get better and better rewards, but the area gets more and more difficult. And you've definitely got to be careful about doing this, considering that there is a penalty for losing in terms of not gathering all those resources and having all of your Guardians cursed. That means it is possible to spiral down into having to remake a bunch of Guardians because the ones that you have got repeatedly cursed and you couldn't complete anything to cure them. And I'm pretty sure this is a deliberate design choice that's meant to mirror stuff like Darkest Dungeon 1, with how sometimes a really bad run could leave your best characters in a really bad state, which caused worse runs in the future, which caused you to eventually have to restart. It's not quite that strict and that brutal here, but I think the idea is the same. I think it's a pretty solid game. Overall, I like the turn-based combat elements. I think that there's a lot of build variety when it comes to all the different kinds of Guardians you can make and how you can get them all out and level them up. There's a lot of sort of theory crafting to be done there, which is something I'm definitely into. I also really like the art style. It's extremely colorful and bizarre, and it looks very much like everything was drawn with a felt tip pen, I think is the best way to describe it. That's what everything looks like. And this definitely extends to the weird enemies and your own Guardians, which are all kind of grotesque and strange looking and have some really detailed animations during combat. Those little like Darkest Dungeon style cut-ins where it zooms in on the monster for a second as they do something, they tend to look really just grotesque and strange, and I definitely appreciate that. It's also a pretty inexpensive game. It doesn't go for that much, even at full price, and considering the amount of content here, I'd say the price is more than fair. The only downside, I would say, is it is more than a little buggy sometimes. I've had some weird bugs in this game, like I've had one menu, the tutorial pop-up never went away, and it's just like a big garbled text field full of messy nonsense, and it just refuses to go away, but it only appears on that one screen, which is bizarre. I've also had some issues where it spawned the exit to a zone I was in, or rather the boss encounter to a zone that I was in, off in the void where I couldn't actually reach it, so I couldn't actually complete the level and I had to fail it and go back and generate a new one. That only happened once though. There's also the weird element where one of my guardians sort of stopped working. They kept spawning dead for some reason, even at the very beginning when no battles had happened yet. The very first battle they would just spawn dead, but the game treated them as if they were alive, so I couldn't do anything with them. They showed up as having full health in the menu, so I ended up having to completely separate that guardian and remake them in order to fix it. So there's definitely a bit of bugginess here, and it definitely could use a few more patches in terms of some just general bug fixes and stability improvements, although it did spend a fair amount of time in early access and had a lot of content and a lot of those more buggy elements already patched up to standard, so that's good to see. And I have a feeling that now that it's fully out, they've probably got a couple more of those bug fix patches in the chamber waiting to be developed and stuff as some more bug reports come in and things. So it's probably in a much better state than it was already when it came to the early access, and I have a feeling that's just going to continue to improve as time goes on. So I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for Thyria if you wish to check it out yourselves. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.